In this podcast, I want to talk about crossing over. And when I talk about crossing over, I mean to the other side, what people call heaven. It's a thing that we're all going to do one day, we're all going to cross. But some of us have crossed or nearly crossed and then come back. So crossing over can be permanent, but it can also be a visitation that you cross over and then you have a choice to come back. Lots of people have written about their crossings, and there are similar things, the tunnel, the light. They are people who will manage to come back and then relay the message. And I think they came back to give hope to people that there is another spiritual dimension, because when a human has done that, comes back and tells the other human, it's like, oh, that's great to know, we're glad they're there. Not everyone's working in the sphere I work in, obviously, and not everyone believes. Some of the people who've crossed didn't believe, and then they crossed, and then they did believe. And for a while there, I think people were embarrassed to say they'd crossed and that they'd seen their father or mother or their God. It was hard for them to say it because they were worried people would think they're crazy. But now there have been so many people who've written books and done podcast videos, talks, that it's a little bit more accepted. I'm doing this podcast because my friend Sue said to me that she didn't really know what happened when I crossed. So when I talked about it in other podcasts, she hadn't really realised. So I thought I'd do a little story about my crossing, which will be different to everyone else's. For me, it was a life-changing event. I actually had an accident on my sewing machine. I basically had a huge electrical accident and was thrown against the wall. And during the time there, I think that's when I did the cross. It's not really a time, it's not like normal time, but I knew I crossed over. And when I crossed, I didn't go down the tunnel, but I did stand. It seemed to me like a river, and I was like standing on one side of the river, and then on the other side of the river, my mother was standing there, and then this huge being of light, and all I could see was the light. The light was just brilliant. It was just blinding. Afterwards, I realised that when I'd done some work on understanding the difference between our human eyes and our soul eyes, that the reason I could look into the light, it didn't hurt my eyes, because I was looking through with my soul eyes. My mother looked rather grim. She didn't look very happy. And I think she was there to tell me about the abuse that had happened, because I had completely forgotten or locked it away so well that I didn't remember it. I think that's why they used an electrical accident to jolt it out of my body almost. And then I was supposed to come back and deal with it. In that moment when I was there and she was telepathically talking to me, I felt that I could stay, but I didn't want to stay because my younger son was only 9 and I had 3 sons. I wasn't worried about my husband. I knew that he would find another partner, but I knew my boys needed to have their mum. I did decide to come back. I wanted to come back, but there was a stipulation that if I came back, I had to face and deal and heal from my childhood, and then I had to do the work. It wasn't I just came back and it was all magical and rainbows and wonderful. It was actually really terrible, because at the same time as I'd had this huge spiritual experience, I'd also had an accident and looked like I had had a stroke on my right side for quite a while. I was completely unable to do things. For 6 weeks I sat in bed because I almost had like muscle meltdown, because the needle broke in the machine, but I went from hand to hand. It went across my heart and I sustained damage. To come back is wonderful, but it's also quite frightening and scary. I felt there was a darkness for about 3 weeks afterwards, and I felt my mother was around. That time was I suppose I could have had another heart attack, and you can have that after a severe electrical accident. Everything's rather delayed. But I had decided to stay, and then the real work began, and I started having dreams and memories, and I went and had rebirthing and began to deal with all of my issues. Concurrently, I was also realising I had a gift. My psychic ability opened up. I started doing massage for myself first, but then I could feel things on the body, and I realised that I had the ability to do healing in my hands. We are often nudged this way. Before, I always knew at 42 something was going to go wrong. I just knew it in my soul. So when I actually had the accident, it was really a relief, because I thought I was going to get cancer and die early. And so the accident wasn't actually so bad. Healing from it took a long time, years actually, to get better. And there's still a little bit of a legacy there, to be careful. But it wasn't going down a path where I would have actually passed. It was like an opening for me. One person had said to me that because it was electricity, it was like I became a lightning shaman, which I found really interesting, because even though I wasn't struck by lightning, I was struck by electricity. When you cross, it's not scary at all. I was just there, and then I was back in my body. It was quick. It was instantaneous, really, for me. Other people go down that big long tunnel, and I must admit I missed going down the tunnel, because I've been reading over the years and realised that I didn't do it the same. But it doesn't matter how you do it. It was to remind me that I was brought back. And in my opinion, it was God who brought me back to tell me, you need to do your work. And that's why my mother looked like she looked, really guilty and very sad, because it wasn't a happy crossing it. It was beautiful to see the light, but she was not in a very good mood when she was telepathically, obviously, telling me things. She probably found that she was part of her karma to actually tell me, because nobody told me. When you read all the books, you'll find it really fascinating, all people's different experiences. I know one man, a German man, and he was a minister, and he crossed and he came back. And although he never told his family, he was told when his time was to come back to the light. I thought that was rather unusual, that he was told that it's not now, you will come back later. And sometimes people are pulled out and then put back in to their body, and they will know that, because they will have that experience and then be back in their body. If you've had this experience, I don't really have to explain it to you. If you haven't, you'll just find it really fascinating, because I was in it and I still found it a fascinating thing. We are sent back usually because we forgot what we were supposed to be doing. And because we forgot, we had to be reminded. And this was probably a spiritual way to remind us. We were taken over there, had a little talk, and then come back and basically get on with what you're supposed to do. So in my case, it was that. People are really changed after they've crossed and come back. Of course, their faith is stronger, but you're more confused. I was more confused when I came back, because did I imagine that? Is it real? Has my accident made me loopy? So I had two things happening at the same time that were intangible. Often they will start working in different areas in their life. Within 18 months, they'll make huge changes. Their dynamics around themselves will also change, their friendship groupings, sometimes their work, even their family, because they've had this huge spiritual awakening, and other people around them may or may not believe them. In my case, most people didn't believe me, and I think it's because I had this accident at the same time, and they just thought that the electrical current had affected my mind. Quite hard to be with some people afterwards, because they just thought I was a little crazy, really, and I can understand that. But for me, it was real, and I know it happened. We don't cross until we're supposed to. There are accidents, but we can be sent back then. For the most part, though, unless it's by our own hand, we don't cross. I wanted to mention that people who keep trying to suicide and it doesn't work are usually being saved by spirit. So they try to kill themselves, and then someone comes home early and finds them, or they try to do it again, and then their daughter rings them up and they have to answer the phone and they can't go through with it, or they try to do the pills and then they throw them all up. So it can actually be blocked. Your crossing can be blocked even if you are trying to cross. And then there are the people who are successful and of course get to the other side and perhaps regret that in that emotional time that they have crossed. It is now more openly spoken about. As we vibrate higher and higher, people will be more understanding that there's another dimension and that we live all in the same dimension in some ways. It's just vibrating all in different ways. My abilities opened and I found out things that I could do and channel and touch people in the sense of healing and make changes. So for me, it was a wonderful thing. Dealing with the childhood wasn't very wonderful, but then that's also helped me because I've written about that, books about that, and I have a deeper understanding of how other people live and what they've been through and how to survive. You might find if you ever speak to someone about the crossing that their face will be quite light when they're telling you and quite in awe, because it is in awe seeing the light. The light was so bright and it was so beautiful and it was so big, like if my mother was 5'10" or I don't know how many centimetres that is now, and then the being of light was standing next to her, but so much larger, like 2 times bigger, and just this expanse of light. I couldn't see in the light. I could hear the voice, but I couldn't see in the light. And everything seemed to be telepathic. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. It was interesting for me to talk about it because I haven't spoken about it for years because it happened when I was 42. So it's been quite a while. But the vividness of it and the impact of it never goes away. I'm grateful I had the accident. It was a blessing, really. And I'm grateful that it opened up my gifts and I could deal and heal myself and then help other people with similar things. I think it was only a positive thing for me. The months and weeks afterwards were very difficult, both physically and emotionally and mentally, really. But I'm glad it was something that they did for me, that Spirit realised I was too locked down. I shut everything down so well that I think this was the only way that they could shake it out. Someone said to me an interesting thing that probably used the accident because I was holding everything down, and for sheer life, that's how I would have felt as a child, locked it down. And then I had the accident. It was a bigger fear, it was a bigger threat, and I let one area go because I now have a really big threat because I could die from the accident, and it released everything. If you've had this experience, you should share it with people because it does give them hope too of the other side. Enjoy your week. Love and light to you, and I hope that you'll meet or see or talk about this with other people, because I think it gives other people faith that there is another dimension. And even though we're told this, to actually live it is quite an interesting thing. So I send you love and light.